So at this point, we are really looking forward to learning a little bit more this afternoon. The presenters, the faculty facilitators, and all the questions in the rapid fire breakout sessions were really quite interesting. The next piece of our meeting we're actually really excited about, and I am most honored to introduce the co-directors of the Academic Autism Spectrum Partnership in Research and Education, or AASPIRE. Dr. Christina Nicolaitis is a general internist and health services researcher, and Dora Raymaker is a research associate professor, both in the School of Social Work at Portland State University. ARP is grateful to AASPIRE for their collaboration and their contributions, especially to participatory research, including autistic folks in the research world. So I very much welcome Christina and Dora. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having us. I think Dora might still be having a little trouble connecting. So she will be up in a second. I'll start while she's figuring out the technical side. So let me share my screen. Oh, actually, I can't. Can somebody let me share my screen? Hello?
Yes, I was all ready to share for you. Let me just change the settings for you.
Oh yeah, because we're going to need to walk people through a website, so it definitely has to. Sorry.
Got you. Anna, is that something that you can help with? Or
while she's doing that, I'll at least start introduction.
Give me a second. Sorry.
So ARP has invited Dora and I, and really our whole ASPIRE team, to help create some trainings for AARP around the use of participatory research and inclusive research practices and other ways that we can strengthen research with the autistic community. Okay, so it looks like Dora's on now. Great. Now let me see if now we can share screens. Yes, I can. Okay, wonderful. So I was just getting people up to date. Again, I'm Christina Nicolaitis, and I think people have been giving a little bit of image descriptions. I am a white, middle-aged woman with gray hair, yeah, and there's Dora.
Hi, I am another white middle-aged woman person, ambiguous person thing, with curly red hair that looks really bad with the background.
So, do you want to start, Dora?
Yeah.
Were you going to tell them a little bit about ASPIRE?
Oh, sorry. There was some confusion about the link and me getting into the meeting, which means that my movie of what I'm supposed to say and do is off. So apologize in advance for me taking a minute to remember what I'm supposed to do. So I am the autistic partner of ASPIRE, if you hadn't gotten that message. So Christina and I started ASPIRE way back in 2006. We are possibly the first and likely the longest running Cbpr collaborative with the autistic community. We have always included both autistic and non-autistic academic scientists and also community partners. Our community partners have always been a majority of autistic people, but we also have always included other stakeholders, including family members, disability service professionals and clinicians. And we try really hard to get as wide a range of lived experience as we can as far as disability characteristics and autism characteristics and kind of backgrounds and race and sexual identity and all of the things. We've been around for a while, and we've worked on multiple National Institutes of Health funded projects, including about life outcomes, healthcare, mental health, and employment. And you can learn a lot more about us and our projects at AASPIRE.org. And there is a picture on this screen of a Zoom window that has a whole bunch of people who were part of our team, I guess 2 years ago now. And many of them are still part of our team. Yeah, there's a variety of different people and faces in the Zoom window. Go ahead.
Okay. So as I started mentioning a little bit earlier while we were getting started, AARP has asked us to create a series of training videos and other training materials. There's going to be one main set of videos that is going to be required of anyone applying for AARP funding. And these are going to be, or these are, we've created them, high-level summaries of the main things that people will need to know. It's going to be about an hour length in total. And then we're going to be creating a series of question and answer videos that go into much greater depths and really try to get at some of the practicalities that might not be easily covered in these sort of big overview type videos. And part of what's going to happen is you'll help us with that today. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend most of our time today just actually doing a Q&A session and taking your questions and doing our best to answer them. We'll probably include some of these answers as part of the series, but then we're also going to work with the rest of our ASPIRE team to create a lot of other Q&A videos for things that are important for researchers to know. And then we've also on our own created a bunch of other materials and resources that we have on our ASPIRE website. And we'll show you today some of the resources that are already there, and we plan on putting more on in the future. So in terms of the content of the videos, the first video is actually created by AARP, and it's about AARP values and expectations. And then we move on to the videos Dora's created.
Yeah, so you'll be able to see both of these videos if you want to, but it'll start out with a choice of kind of who are you and where are you coming into this as far as your connection to the autistic community and to neurodiversity. So if you're like, I'm an academic scientist without any connection and I'm new to these terms and I'm not sure if I'm using them right and I don't really understand it, then that will point you to the neurodiversity and the autistic community video. And if you're like me, you're an autistic scientist and you're already part of community and you know all of that, that will point you to the considerations for autistic researchers video. So the neurodiversity and the autistic community starts with just sort of like, what is community? What is neurodiversity? It gives a brief history of the autistic and neurodiversity community. It talks about how to kind of rethink autism research through a neurodiversity lens. And then talks about implications of that on science and potentially on your science. And it ends with just some considerations for how to effectively and respectfully interact and engage with the autistic community when you're doing your science. The other video, that's more for people like me, starts with some considerations around disclosure and identity, including our value and also our limitations. And then it talks a bit about ableism in the academy and how to maybe deal with some of the common ableist pushbacks that I've gotten to being specifically an insider researcher working, an autistic person working on autism research. And then it ends with just a little bit about how we might be able to facilitate broader systems change for ourselves and for the community.
And then I've created 2 videos, the first of which is really focused on using participatory research approaches with the autistic community, specifically focusing on bringing autistic community members, not necessarily autistic scientists, autistic community members onto the research team. And then the second video is really now thinking about autistic people, not as so much as your team members, but as much as study participants, and what are some of the considerations we need to think about when doing research with autistic participants, especially adolescents and adults, where you might be getting informed consent and collecting data directly from the autistic person, not their parents or their supporters. I'll go into more. My videos are structured very similarly to the toolkit, so I can go into the details of what's in the videos as we go through our website. So as I mentioned, those are the main videos, and we'll be building some more question and answers today. But we also have a bunch of other material that is on our website that's really meant to supplement these trainings, and that can be used whether or not you're doing the AARP trainings. So I'm going to share 1 second. So now hopefully you can see this is so this here is our ASPIRE website. If you go to our ASPIRE website, if you click on ASPIRE Inclusion Tools, or if you go up here to the Inclusion Toolkit, you can get to these materials, and you'll notice that they're organized very much in the same way as the videos. So if you go to, for example, the neurodiversity and disability rights, you'll be able to see the video that Dora was just talking about. And then Dora, do you want to say anything else about some of the supplemental materials that you're planning on including?
Well, mostly that supplemental materials are coming, but I point out this in the video, and it's also on the website. Both Dr. Nick Walker's material on neurodiversity is fantastic, and then Stephen Kapp, who's been one of our long-running collaborators with ASPIRE, edited a book, Autistic Activism and the Neurodiversity Movement. I encourage people, I say this in the video, but I encourage people to go and see what's out there. 10 years ago, 16 years ago, when ASPIRE started, there really wasn't a whole lot that you could do other than asking us directly, but now there's actually a large literature, and even these 2 textbooks out here that are about neurodiversity and autistic community that you can go to and get more information. So, and I will be putting up more on this as we go.
And then on this part of the website, this is the video that I mentioned that is talking about using participatory research approaches with the autistic community. And the supplemental materials are really designed to kind of go along with the training. So you'll notice that first in the video, we talk about different participatory approaches and the difference between them. A lot of people seem to use the term community-based participatory research. That's what we do with ASPIRE, but that's really only one type of research, one type of participatory approach, and may or may not be the most appropriate approach depending on your project. So there's some information about that. And then we talk a little bit about team structures and what you should be thinking about as you're putting together the leadership of your team, and then how you're bringing in other people into the team. I talk a little bit about how you recruit once you and the leadership group together recruits new partners, and you'll see that we have some examples of some of the recruitment materials we've used in recent years, if you wish to model off of any of them. And then once we have partners, how some of the things we use to onboard them and get them get them to become ready to be part of the team. And we have some of our example materials that we give to new partners as they're coming onto a team. And then we talk about the new project, kind of kicking off a project. We've got some sample slides from some kickoff meetings that we have from a variety of our projects, and also some sample slides for some of the kind of Science 101 trainings that we've had in order to get some of our community partners up to speed and ready to be able to fully join in to the work. We also do trainings similarly for academic partners, but I don't have a slide for those. Those tend to be a little bit more informal. And then we have some information about our team meetings and just things you might want to consider as you're doing team meetings. And then we do a lot of work preparing for team meetings. So we have some examples of announcements and a template for it and slides, and then examples of some of the prep materials that we do to have people get ready for a meeting and so forth. And then we have some information about shared decision making and the process we use. It's only one process, but it works pretty well for us. And then we have a template we use for using email, because email is really important and really overwhelming. So we find it's very helpful to have some structure to it to help make sure people don't get, well, it doesn't make sure because sometimes it's still overwhelming, but to reduce how much we overwhelm people with our emails. And then we've got some examples of authorship policies and presentation policies, so that you can be thinking about how you're going to collaboratively be disseminating the findings of your work, as well as a little bit of information around some of the things we do to be constantly evaluating our collaboration. And then the last section is about accessible human subjects research, where again there's a video here that's the high level training, and then you'll see there's some information about some of the considerations you need to be thinking about when involving human subjects in research. We have some examples of some of our informed consent and information sheets or consent forms to help people with informed consent. You'll notice if you look at any of these that they really don't look like the typical templates. But they do include all of the required elements. We've just worked really, really hard to try to make them more accessible so people can actually be informed about the informed consent they are giving. And then we have some sample qualitative interview guides, again, largely because we found that it's totally possible to do good qualitative research with autistic people, but putting a lot of thought into an interview guide that's going to allow people to give you rich data is really important. And then we've been doing a lot of work over the years adapting surveys. So we've got our overall recommendations about creating accessible surveys, as well as any of the surveys that we've already published are free for anybody to use. We are in the process right now of doing a really big NIH-funded award to create a lot more survey instruments than are up there now, but those are going to have to wait till we're done testing them. And then we've got a little bit of information here, a little bit more to come about how do we get information from informants when it's not possible to get information directly from an autistic person, even with all the accommodations and supports as you possibly can. So all of this stuff is here, and it'll all be better if you give us good questions that you want us to answer. So I will stop sharing. Maybe I will stop sharing, And we welcome any questions from you. I'm guessing that the question that's in here about B12 deficiency and toe walking is not for us, but for the previous talk about toe walking. So I will not answer that.
Thank you so much for sharing what you have been working on, your videos and your website. I am thinking of a question related to a work group that we are at AUCD are just starting up, and we are wanting to make sure is representative at every level, folks with lived experience. And there is a challenge that we are facing in making sure that I think that your last one that you had a drop-down option on when the person's unable to speak for themselves, like an informed person, someone else to help out with that. How I didn't take the chance to look through it as you were showing it. I feel like I need to look at that a little more deeply and see if that has the information about what I'm looking for. But sort of, you know, we have these spaces when we are talking about research and we are talking about planning and we are in these meetings together, and some people just don't like sitting in front of a computer in front of meetings. And how, like, my question is really about how do we get input from everybody when even just the format of academic work is the wrong format for somebody.
I think probably both Dora and I have thoughts on this, but I'll start. It's really hard. And there is nothing that we can tell you that's going to like easily solve it. That being said, I do think there's a lot of things that can help. One is to include a real diversity of perspectives. There isn't, I mean, when we're thinking about people who truly cannot participate by themselves, there's no way for any of us to really know what their true perspective is. However, we find that by including a lot of people who have adjacent perspectives, that can help us get to something that ultimately we think is potentially as useful as possible. So on our teams, we have autistic people with all sorts of different disability characteristics, lived experiences. We have people who speak fluently. We have people who can speak occasionally, but it's not their preferred mode. We have people who are non-speaking, who, one of our team members uses a letterboard to speak. In the past, we've had others who only speak through typing. We also similarly have partners who have intellectual disability and partners who don't have intellectual disability, partners who have auditory processing issues and partners who don't, and so forth. The actual meetings, part of it is being very, very flexible in how people participate in meetings, and then also helping as much as possible get people prepared for meetings, and also deciding what work happens in what meetings. So for one, we try to have separate meetings that we call our Science Geek meetings, that are where the academic partners and the community partners who are geeky about science can come and debate their hearts out about the psychometric properties of a particular thing. The point is that they can get that out of the way, not because we're trying to hide it from anybody, but because we want to make sure that the full team meetings really center the voices of our community partners. So we try to just, that way academic partners are there, but they're not spending a lot of time debating each other or getting into really technical conversations. The other thing we do is we give people a lot of preparation materials. So we send out materials that are both easy read and more detailed, so people kind of have done their homework if they can, to be able to come to the meeting and know what to expect. Having had the time to think about things and process things makes a really big difference for many of our partners. Some of our partners are too busy and they don't, but for the ones who want that, that's really helpful. During team meetings, it's not, even though we do them through Zoom now, and it seems like, oh, everybody's doing meetings through Zoom, it just doesn't mean just going through Zoom and having things accessible, like, oh, there's a chat function. If you just let it go, there's one conversation in chat and there's a different conversation in, orally in the audio visual, and they're not connected. So we try really hard to like stop and facilitate and read out loud everything that's in the chat and bring it into the conversation in real time. It does take extra help from research assistants or students to try to monitor and make sure that we're really, keeping the full team involved. And then we tried automatic captioning, but it really just wasn't good enough because this is sort of specialized things we're talking about. So we actually do spend the money to have professional captioning at our meetings because a lot of our partners have trouble with auditory processing. That all being said, we work really, really hard at this, and we've been doing this a long time. And sometimes things are inaccessible. Sometimes we haven't included everybody. And we do a lot of stopping and breaking and fixing and tweaking and meeting with people individually because they didn't get a chance to participate, etc. And we've always had a kind of approach to be flexible about meetings so that people can come to meetings, but if that isn't the way they can best participate, we give so much information in advance that people can participate in other ways. They can have a one-on-one meeting with one of our research assistants. They can reply via email. They can do a phone call. And the other thing I didn't mention is we also have pre-meetings where people can just kind of go over the materials, get used to things so that they can be better prepared for actual meetings. But it's a long-winded way of saying it takes a lot of work. But I think by having people with a lot of different types of lived experience, and also by having supporters, we have some people on our team we have several people on our team that are family members of autistic individuals, but by having them all together, I think we ultimately get someplace that's helpful, even if it's not perfect.
So Christina just told you exactly all of the things that we currently do. I want to just briefly give you a different way of thinking about it, which I heard you mention that like even the academic format itself is a problem. And I would say, let's rethink that. I would love to see other models for collaborative research that don't follow that model because it's an inherently ableist, sexist, racist model. And I would love to see people come up with novel ways of breaking that down and maybe conducting your collaborations in different types of ways, which is also like, Christina described exactly what we are currently doing given the people who we have on our teams right now. That is not what we have always done. And I want to encourage you to, instead of thinking of what we're saying as a prescriptive list of like, if I do these things, then I'm doing exactly inclusive research. What you need to do is you need to like work with your team and ask your team, like what's going to work for you. And it's a very customized process. It's the same kind of customization that you put into any kind of like reasonable accommodation type thing. Like who is on your team, their needs, the things they love, the things that make them excited, the things that are going to make them really invested in this project together with you are specific to those people and to the dynamic between them. So I think on a higher level, I would encourage you to think about your team and think outside the box instead of trying to make what your preconceived notion of how academia is supposed to run work for them. So there's a question in the Q&A. Is somebody else fielding those, or are we
Well, that was
I
good.
just clicked on it. That will answer it live. Do you want to take a stab starting, Dora, or do you want me to start?
It does. I just wanted to, sometimes a moderator manages those, and I just wanted to know if it was a moderator or us.
Why don't you start so that we can be trading orders?
So the question in the chat or in the Q&A is, how do you decide if Cbpr is right for the project? And so community-based participatory research is its own specific thing. There are resources on our website. It was developed in public health, and it has a set of principles. It's an explicitly emancipatory research process. It's got a history of in a large literature that is far outside of just what we've done in an autism context. Action research, the sort of parent tree, is huge. There are a million different ways of conducting participatory research. And I would say look at what Cbpr really is. Look at the principles, look at its work, look at what you would have to do. It's really about this idea that academic knowledge and community lived experience are equally valuable and legitimate sources of knowledge, and that both are absolutely necessary when you're doing science. So it's really kind of about disrupting knowledge power monsters and those kinds of things. So if you have the resources, if it feels right after you've looked into it, then sure. If you look at it and you're like, oh no, I'm a PhD student with no funding, and I don't this is huge. There are other ways of doing participatory research. So I would say just look and see what it is and see if it's a good fit for your project and who you have. Yeah. And there's a bigger world out there if it looks like it's not.
Yeah, I would totally echo what Dora said. And really, Cbpr is one type of participatory approach. The hallmarks of Cbpr are they're really aiming for equal power sharing, and that this is action research. You're actually trying. So that may be appropriate for what you're doing. That may not be appropriate for what you're doing. Just as an example, the PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, has a lot of wonderful information about patient and stakeholder engagement that is really striving for authentic engagement. It doesn't mean that it has to be sort of really striving for this equal thing. And it doesn't have to be action research. It doesn't even have to be based in a community. And sometimes that's more appropriate. So really it's thinking about, how much do you want to share power? And then what's the goal? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to create social change? Are you trying to, compare the effectiveness of one, drug to another drug? Those can all still be done in a participatory approach, but it may be more appropriate. And then I do want to just point out that a lot of people talk about community advisory boards and advisors and getting feedback from people and getting impact from people. That's okay. And you can use an advisory approach, but be really, really careful, because if you're only asking for advice or feedback or input, and you're not necessarily going to act on that input, you have to be really, really clear with people that that's the case. Because you don't want to be in a situation where people think that they're collaborating with you when really you're treating it more as, in a way, a source of data collection. And certainly if you're going to be using people as advisors, make sure to really think hard before you ignore their advice, because sometimes the advice, the recommendation somebody may be making may not work, but there might be something beneath it that's leading to them to make that suggestion or that recommendation. And if you are just kind of taking it or leaving it, you might actually really not understand what's happening when you're actually sharing power and having to ultimately agree to doing something, you often have to push much further to understand why it is that people are advising things that don't seem to make sense to you at face value.
I always tell people, whatever you do, just be transparent about it. It's okay if you aren't able to do a full Cbpr thing, but just be transparent about what it is that you are doing.
So I see another, oh, sorry, Dawn, did you have?
Well, no, there was a question earlier about, is there a moderator? And it was meant to be me. And I was like, put my camera on and off. I didn't want to get in the way of, of you being spotlighted. But yes, I can field the next question for you. In the same vein, what advice would you give to someone before starting work with community members? For example, should you come in with clearly defined roles and expectations, or should it be defined as the project moves forward?
I think that's it could be either. Like I'm a big proponent of paying attention to who the people are and how it's growing. I mean, if you have somebody who you know from the community and the two of you get together and get excited and get an idea for a project, which is kind of how Christina and I started ASPIRE, then there weren't defined roles and expectations at the start. It was defined as the project moved forward. Now that ASPIRE's been around for a long time, we actually do have a whole bunch of like defined roles within the organization that you can find in the supplemental materials on our website. So it kind of, I think that all are good, and I would pay attention to what's happening organically and pay attention to the community people who you're engaging with. I mean, do they know you? Do you already have a relationship? Are they people who are distrusting of you and you're going to have to really do a whole lot of work to even get to the point where they want to collaborate with you? So yeah, I don't know that was a super useful answer. Maybe Christina can give you something a little bit more concrete, but I just always come back to, I listen to people, be respectful, and really just hear them.
No, Dory and I often have like, so I was going to say something almost exactly, not exactly the same. It really depends. And it really depends on your situation, your environment, the people, the project. I think sometimes there's like, people put a little bit too much weight around like, who started this? Who got this idea? Where did this come from? And that's important, but I think more important is ultimately, is this something that is important to the community? Is this something that is going to advance science? Is this something that's going to help the world? Where's this, something that's feasible? Where is that sweet spot? And it might be that, somebody from the community comes to an academic with a fully fledged idea that they want help with. It might be that an academic, has this idea that they're going to the community. It might be that you're just hanging out and talking about stuff and this idea pops up. It might be that you're working on one thing and then this other thing happens. The who started it is not as important as, are you actually at some point doing something that is important, is of interest, and that you end up in a place where you're transparent about expectations and roles and everything else. I generally think it's better not to define everything before involving the community, because then you're really, again, you're getting into a situation where you're just kind of asking for input. But that's where sometimes having some, starting with some leaders, starting with a few people where you can really kind of be the back end and brainstorm and work together is a good thing before you bring on a lot of other people. Because at some point when you get into larger numbers, it does help to have a bit more definition.
What a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all your information and great questions from folks in the audience, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. Really appreciate you being here today, and appreciate your partnership as well.